Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve, wishing you a very pleasant evening and welcome back to my channel. And this evening I would like to talk once again, oh my god, we have to revisit this question of freedom of speech, because around the world today freedom of speech is being squelched at a rate of knots, whether it be Britain, France, Germany, or in fact most of Europe, Hong Kong, and Canada and the United States of America. Free speech is being literally exterminated. And you may wonder why freedom of speech is such an important issue. And it's such an important issue because without freedom of speech, nothing can be truly negotiated. You cannot negotiate any of your other rights if you don't have freedom of speech. All of a sudden the imagination goes out of the language because you are limiting what people can say and what people can think, and after a while people start to self-police, and that's when you're in real trouble and the whole dialogue shuts down. People are frightened to talk to each other for fear of offending somebody or saying the wrong thing or having the wrong thought or the wrong ideas. And so if you have a new idea, you are not going to put that forward because you'll be scared to death that somebody is going to be offended by that and you will lose your job or you will be demoted or whatever. The removal of freedom of speech takes away the flexibility of our language. And of course they are doing this by stealth, bit by bit, and it's amazing the tactics that they use. And this is really, what you need to do is to be able to identify who and what a globalist is. And the reason I say that is because the divisions have now become pretty murky between left and right and exactly what the goal or the ideology is. Because we have a conservative leaning side of globalism and we have a liberal leaning side of globalism. And so what they do, and what I think is happening right now, you see, is they're going to bounce us backwards and forwards from majority liberal to majority conservative, or as you've seen in America there, we went from Clinton to Bush, Bush to Obama, Obama to Trump, backwards and forwards from one side to the other. And either side is maybe not as dissimilar as you might think. And so you have to sort of ferret out the little things that globalists like to do, and one of them is taking away your freedom of speech. And why would that be? Well, so you can't criticize, so that you can't fully understand the contracts that they're writing, because the language is beyond your comprehension. It's all in legalese and government speak and this kind of stuff, and this has absolutely far-reaching effects in your life. It means going to court is now difficult to pursue a complaint mechanism, and because you can't get the kind of redress that you want to have, it basically keeps you on the back foot all the time. You're frustrated, and of course with the use of hate speech, this is the new thing. When it was Stephen Harper was definitely a globalist. Okay, he wanted to squash freedom of speech, but he basically insinuated that if you didn't go along with his form of censorship, that you were aiding and abetting pedophiles. And this is a disgusting insult, of course. Who wants to be associated with that kind of thing? And now, of course, the left side of the argument is coming up with hate speech and bullying, and protecting people from being bullied and harassed. And of course they pick out the most horrendous examples of online bullying, of online trolling, and so on and so forth, terrorist groups and all this kind of thing, when they really are only a very, very small percentage of the activity on the internet. And they use this tiny, tiny little wedge issue to convince you that to protect you, we all have to be surveilled, our speech has to be monitored, and the social media platforms have to basically decide what is good and what is bad. You'll see in the article that I'm going to show you that now they want to shut down parents' ability to refuse vaccinations on religious grounds or philosophical grounds. And how can you argue that point if you don't have freedom of speech? Because, you know, what's going to happen, I'll tell you right now what is going to happen. And we're already seeing this, and certainly I'm seeing it in government offices, you know, where you see people getting anxious or upset or, you know, angry at the responses that they're getting from the staff. And next thing you know, whoops, you're bullying, you're persecuting, this is dangerous, I'm feeling scared here, I need to go to a safe space, and all of a sudden security are there, and you're getting dragged off merely because you were frustrated, because the hoops you had to jump through, all in working time, I might add. So if you're a working person, this is doubly frustrating. There is nothing you can access in the evening. And of course the websites that they send you to are virtually incomprehensible. You might find one or two things that you can you know, navigate fairly successfully around, but try and navigate Ontario regulations. These things are changing all the time. It's unbelievable when you try and do some research on this kind of stuff. So all of these things are restricted when you restrict freedom of speech. Anyway, let's go over and take a look at these articles, and we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap-up. Okie dokie, here we go. So this is from the Gatestone Institute International Policy Council, Killing Free Speech in Canada by Judith Bergman. In May, Canada launched a so-called Digital Charter meant to promote trust in a digital world. The Charter contains 10 principles, 3 of which deal with hate speech and disinformation. The Charter said Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will target fake news and hate speech online. The platforms are failing their users and they're failing our citizens, he said. They have to step up in a major way to counter disinformation, and if they don't, we will hold them to account and there will be meaningful financial consequences. The Government of Canada, the Charter says, will defend freedom of expression and protect against online threats and disinformation designed to undermine the integrity of elections and democratic institutions. Canadians can expect that digital platforms will not foster or disseminate hate, violent extremism, or criminal content. There will be clear, meaningful penalties, it adds, for violations of the laws and regulations that support these principles. As it has become standard in such cases, the Charter contains no definition of what constitutes hate, making it a catch-all for whatever the Canadian government deems politically inopportune. This is all exhaustingly familiar by now. Germany already has legislation that requires social media platforms to censor their users. Social media companies are obliged to delete or block any online criminal offences within 24 hours of receipt of a user complaint. The German government can fine them up to 50 million euros for failing to comply with the law. France is working on it. The Digital Charter was launched a week after Canada signed the Christchurch Call to Action. Yet another government-led drive for more censorship in the name of fighting terrorist and violent extremist content online. Canada already has hate speech laws in its criminal code, according to which anyone who publicly incites or willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group commits an indictable offence. The identifiable group includes any section of the public distinguished by colour, race, religion, national or ethnic origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or mental or physical disability. Section 318 prohibits advocating or promoting genocide. To some, however, the criminal code on hate speech is apparently not enough. In June, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, in a report titled Taking Action to End Online Hate, recommended that the Canadian government establish a civil remedy for those who claim that their human rights have been violated. After hearing a large number of witnesses, the majority of the committee suggested that Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, or something similar to it, be reinstated. Section 13 was a very controversial provision repealed in 2013 under the Stephen Harper government after being criticised by free speech advocates for enabling censorship on the internet. Section 13 stated that it was discriminatory for people to communicate via computer or on the internet any matter that is likely to expose a person or persons to hatred or contempt by reason of the fact that that person or those persons are identifiable on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination. In its report, the House of Commons Committee also made a number of other recommendations to the Canadian government for the fight against online hatred, among them increasing funding for law enforcement, Crown attorneys and judges to ensure sufficient training on the importance and the need to combat online hatred, including being sensitive to complainants. Improving data collection so that the government ensures that we have a more complete understanding of the extent of hatred in Canada, particularly hatred that is directed online. This undertaking includes the establishment of uniform pan-Canadian guidelines and standards for the collection and handling of hate crime data and hate incident data, and a national database to retain and analyse hate crime and hate incident data. To do this, the committee asks that the government address that the members of marginalised groups feel more comfortable reporting hate incidents and hate crimes directly to civil society organisations which reflect their community rather than law enforcement officials. Resources need to be allocated to assist in the collection of data by both governmental institutions as well as civil society organisations. Crucially, police forces and other agents of the state who work with hate crimes must reflect the racial, religious, LGBTQ and general diversity of the populations they represent. Police forces, particularly their hate crimes units, must work collaboratively alongside civil society organisations. Now, we're not quite sure what agents of the state are. A similar cooperative model with civil society organisations already exists in the UK, where the reportedly discredited civil society organisation Tell Mama, for instance, has operated in cooperation with British police. Furthermore, in order to prevent online hate, the government should educate the population as to what on the internet constitutes hate. Oh, so there's going to be an education camp, no doubt, for those who have been bullying online. And who decides what that bullying is? Well, of course, the government does. Unlike many other such initiatives, the committee wants the government to formulate a definition of what constitutes hate, pointing out it is critical that this definition acknowledges persons who are disproportionately targeted by hate speech, including, but not limited to, racial, indigenous, ethnic, linguistic, sexual orientation, gender identity and religious groups. Finally, and in line with European developments, the committee asks the government to establish requirements for online platforms and internet service providers with regards to how they monitor and address incidents of hate speech, and the need to remove all posts that would constitute online hatred in a timely manner. As in Europe, the suggestion is that online platforms will be financially penalised if they fail to live up to the requirements. Online platforms must have a duty to report regularly to users on data regarding online hate incidents, how many incidents were reported, what actions were taken, what content was removed, and how quickly the action was taken. Failure to properly report on online hate must lead to significant monetary penalties for the online platform. Not everyone, however, agrees with the proposed strategy for the Canadian government. The Conservative Party wrote a dissenting opinion in the report according to which many of the suggestions would, if implemented, have the dual impact of stifling free speech of those acting in good faith, while also serving to further radicalise bad actors by driving their communications out of the public square. Driving reprehensible ideas underground will not end them. It will merely prevent them from being debated and debunked. The Conservative members of the committee were against reintroducing the repealed Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. They recommended instead that sanctions regarding hate crimes online or elsewhere should be dealt with under the appropriate sections of the Criminal Code. They also recommended that the definition of hate under the Criminal Code be limited to where a threat of violence or incitement to violence is directed against an identifiable group, and that rather than attempting to control speech and ideas, the government explore appropriate security measures to address all three elements of a threat: intent, capability, and opportunity. The Conservative members conclude, far too many innocent individuals have been impacted by extremist violence in recent years. Sickening ideologies which encourage individuals to take their lives of their fellow human beings have faced a concerning proliferation both at home and around the world. Yet sadly, Justin Trudeau and the Liberal members of this committee have tried to use these troubling events as a way to bolster their political fortunes. They have tried to paint anyone who doesn't subscribe to their narrow value set as an extremist. This is dangerous. Conservatives believe that Canadian society is resilient precisely because it offers a big tent for all sorts of views. but that we also must hold those accountable who distribute material that radicalizes individuals and leads to extremist violence. If the government proves sympathetic to the recommendations of the committee, the prospects for free speech in Canada look increasingly bleak. And this from the Toronto Sun. Civil Liberties Group challenges draconian Liberal elections speech law. The Canadian Civil Liberties Group has launched an urgent application against the Trudeau government in the name of free speech, the Sun has learned. The Canadian Constitution Foundation, CCF, a non-partisan charity, states in documents prepared for the Ontario Superior Court that the government's new election laws violates the Charter of Rights of Canadians who wish to voice their opinions in the current election campaign. Those who make statements honestly and in good faith are exposed to the risk of imprisonment, reads the CCF's application. It is a blunt and unrefined instrument that treats sarcastic quips and deliberate lies as one and the same. Both are subject to a blanket ban. Corey Morgan, for example, an outspoken political commentator and activist from Alberta, adds in an affidavit that he fears the social media arguments about how Justin Trudeau has broken the law and that the former Alberta NDP government was colluding with trade unions, which he considers free speech statements, could see him prosecuted under Section 91. And this again for the Sun. Do away with religious exemptions for vaccines. Toronto health officials. See, this is bureaucrats making a decision now. Eliminate religious and philosophical exemptions when it comes to giving school children vaccines, says Toronto Public Health. The recommendations come after the World Health Organization identified vaccine hesitancy, the reluctance or refusal to vaccinate despite the availability of vaccine, as one of the top 10 global health threats and a growing concern in Canada. Toronto health officials also want search engines and Facebook, Twitter and other social media sites to take steps to reduce the availability of vaccine misinformation. And of course, it's not like we've had any problems with drugs before that these companies have given out. With all the antidepressants and antipsychotics, the ones that give you suicidal thoughts. And what about chemicals like DDT and glyphosate and 2,4-D and safe radiation levels? And, they were all safe, right? Arsenic, radium that they used to put on luminous dials of watches, asbestos. These were all deemed safe. So as long as these health companies, these big pharma corporations keep making mistakes, we should have the right to have religious or philosophical exemptions still in place. And who are these Toronto health officials, these unelected bureaucrats, to take away your freedom of choice? It's just another freedom being snipped away that once they're gone, my friends, they are gone. Okay, this is from the Right Edition. Environment Canada, the federal environment agency in Canada, has erased a century's worth of observed temperature data, claiming its modelled computer projections are more accurate. Canadians already suspicious of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's carbon tax are likely to be even more suspicious given a report by Ottawa-based Blacklock's reporter that Environment Canada omitted a century's worth of observed weather data in developing its computer models on the impacts of climate change. The scrapping of all observed weather data from 1850 to 1949 was necessary, a spokesman for Environment Canada told Blacklock's reporter, after researchers concluded that historically there weren't enough weather stations to create a reliable data set for that 100-year period. The historical data is not observed historical data, the spokesman said. It is modelled historical data. 24 models from historical simulations spanning 1950 to 2005 were used. This excuse is unlikely to persuade sceptical observers of the climate-industrial complex, which has consistently sought to play down, conceal or even destroy temperature data which does not fit in with the alarmist global warming narrative. And there you go. Freedom of speech just trampled on. This is a Liberal government, remember? So Stephen Harper got rid of the scientists, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is getting rid of the science. How very convenient. Both of them globalists. Beware. So, as I said earlier in my vlog there, that it's very confusing because you now have the left and the right both trying to stifle freedom of speech. I mean, it's most alarming coming from the left, because the left were the ones who tried to defend freedom of speech. Back in the 60s, oh yeah, in those Vietnam days, they were defenders of free speech. So to have this coming from the left is absolutely staggering, but we must not be confused that voting the Liberals out with by putting the Conservatives in with a majority is as big a mistake as trying to vote the Conservatives out and putting the Liberals in with a majority. Okay, I'm not quite sure how we are going to do this, but what we really need is a minority government. Okay, and I think this time out, certainly in Canada, we are in a situation where you may see that. There are 4 parties now. There is the Liberals, of course, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Greens, and the PPC, People's Party of Canada. Sorry, there are 5 parties running. And of course Bloc Québécois, but they're really so localized in Quebec we won't really discuss those because they don't ever campaign in the rest of Canada. There is enough upset right now with Trudeau. Neither of the leaders, neither Trudeau nor Scheer, are particularly liked. Jagmeet Singh, the head of the NDP, the leader of the NDP party, is basically an invisibility. Elizabeth May of the Green Party is set to gain quite a few seats. I think they're going to steal from the NDP and the Liberals. I think the NDP are going to steal from the Liberals. I think that the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier, are going to steal from the Conservatives, and we may just get enough spread of the vote that we end up with a minority government. Now, you might call me crazy, but I do like to vote. I do like to participate in what I like to think is a democratic process. But this time out, I am going to vote strategically. So I am not going to vote for either of the main parties. I really can't live with the NDP platform. Some of the things that Jagmeet Singh has said is absolutely outrageous. That social justice, for example, trumps your right to the presumption of innocence. That is basically a deal breaker right there. You know, the presumption of innocence is absolutely tantamount, right along with freedom of speech. So, yes, I'm going to vote with either the Greens or the PPC or the Rhino Party, but I'll be voting not for the main 2 parties in an effort to spread that vote around. And like I say, I don't know if that would work. It's just an idea of mine, but we need to get a minority government, because when we have a minority government, all of a sudden the people's wishes really do take center stage. Everything has to be negotiated, and any party, the party that's got a minority, they have to show that there is public will before they can move ahead, because they can be defeated. They have to maintain an alliance with the party that's given them the majority to govern, and so this changes the whole scene. And the Netherlands, for example, Holland, had minority governments basically from the Second World War right the way up into the 90s, and that country is an excellently run country, and it really is a people-based country and a people-based government, because, as I say, no one party had the power, so they had to put a mandate in front of the people before they could get anything done, before they could get the other parties to agree. And that is what we want. It may take a little longer, but at least we get recognition for the public, and also what you escape with a minority government is these knee-jerk reactions. And that is one of the huge problems that we have today, is leaders of majority parties flying off with a knee-jerk reaction over something that is a flash-in-the-pan situation. And that, again, is very dangerous to allow them that scope where they may do something completely ridiculous, like clamp down on free speech without discussing it with the public, because they feel threatened. And I guess I know this video is a little long, but the last thing I would like to mention is that I guess one of the other things I'm really disappointed with is the lack of public outrage. You know, we are going to be the big losers. If we lose freedom of speech, if we start having things shut down at the behest of the government, information shut down, and of course again we had that recently, Environment Canada under a Liberal government simply just erased 100 years of weather data from 1850 to 1950. And why is that? Well, because that is when we were coming out of the Little Ice Age. and that is inconvenient weather data, and so they don't want to other people to see that, so they can make up their own mind about what's going on. So it just disappeared. Now, and this is so interesting because, you know, they always accuse Stephen Harper of getting rid of the scientists, but now here we have Justin Trudeau getting rid of the science. Which is better? So think about this when you're voting, and learn to recognize who the globalists are. As I say, they're like the big trade deals, the TPPs, the CETAs, the NAFTAs, all of this kind of stuff. They love to shut down free speech. They love to control you through bureaucracy. So when you see anyone who is handing off to bureaucracy, promoting these ideas, you know that you're dealing with a globalist. And trust me, you do not want to be governed by bureaucrats. You never want to give up your sovereignty where you can unelect a government that is not doing what you expect them or want them to do. That's the whole idea of sovereignty. That's the whole idea of democracy. And of course, globalism has not been called undemocratic. It's been called anti-democratic. So I hope you found this video interesting, and please leave a comment below. It's always great to hear what you have to say, any ideas that you have. I can't always respond to all of those comments, but I do try my best, and I certainly do scroll through because it's important to get as many points of view on this whole subject as we possibly can. So please comment, like and subscribe below, and in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we will talk very, very shortly. You take care now. See ya. Bye.